Hello, I am Joel McLeod.
And I'm Roland Tanner.
And welcome to the 905er. We pride ourselves on being nonpartisan on this podcast. We are progressive in our viewpoints, and we make no illusions about it. However, we never shy away from someone from the opposite viewpoint to us. We think polite, thoughtful discourse makes not only this podcast better, but our political discourse in this country in general. Which is why our attention became centered on a new group seeking to hold municipal governments accountable across Canada. Municipal Watch is a self-described, non-partisan organization seeking to root out corruption, fiscal mismanagement, and to hold municipal governments accountable to us, the people. All of which sounds good and ideal on the surface. However, we have heard this refrain before. The issues surrounding municipal governments are complex and diverse. Toronto is not Hamilton, and Hamilton is not Oshawa, and Oshawa is not Newmarket. You get my point. Our cities in the 905 are not a one-size-fits-all case, especially in light of recent changes in municipal powers by the Ontario PC government in Bill 23, as well as the creation of strong mayor powers. So how would this grassroots watchdog organization work to root out corruption? We had a lot of questions about how this group would work, their priorities, and what were they hoping to accomplish in the long term. So I reached out to them and invited their founder to the podcast. Surprisingly, they said yes. Stella Ambler is the founder and president of Municipal Watch. She was also the Conservative MP for Mississauga South between 2011 and 2015, a Brampton City Council candidate in 2006, as well as a former PC staff member at Queen's Park, and has worked in the Leader of the Opposition's office in Ottawa under Andrew Scheer. She currently resides in Simcoe County, and as well, it should be noted that she is the first Conservative Party member to join us here on the 905er. We welcome her today.
You looking to make the most out of this life and optimize your personal wellness? Then check out the Natural Man Podcast. Join me, host Mike C., as we explore all areas of human wellness, physical, mental, and emotional. Learn strategies to optimize your own well-being and be in the driver's seat of your own health. Remember, your doctor works for you. Learn biohacks, neurohacks, ways to improve sleep, and ways to optimize your body and your mind. Check us out on Apple, Spotify, the Fountain app, and at naturalmanpodcast.com.
Well, thank you to Stella Ambler of Municipal Watch for coming on to the podcast. Thank you, Stella, for taking the time to join us today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So your organization is quite new. We discovered you by listening to the Pointers podcast, What's the Point, one afternoon, and we invited you on. And because you're so new, I imagine a lot of our listeners have no idea what you're about. They don't know what this organization does. Can you just tell us what is Municipal Watch and why did you create this organization from the start?
Thanks for starting there. I appreciate that. To be able to start at the beginning is exactly what I had in mind. Mainly, I guess, because I had been just recognizing how massive this level of government is and how really little attention is paid to it. I found that when I was a member of Parliament, there is opposition built into the system at the federal level, the provincial level. There's a question period every day. It's covered by the media. Everyone knows what it is. And if they want to know what politicians are talking about, they go not only to the government, but they look at what the opposition is making hay about. And I found that, and so this happens, of course, across Canada and provincial legislatures as well. And I found that it really isn't happening so much at the municipal level, that municipal councillors, there's really nothing built into the system. And if they almost have to be their own opposition, which is really impossible to do. And sometimes if you're sitting around a council table, and I've seen this in my municipality in Simcoe County, but also elsewhere in bigger cities across Canada, that sometimes the counselors form a bit of a bubble, or they just bounce ideas off each other, and they're just not really hearing from ordinary citizens who have very ordinary concerns, which are ordinary but very important. So I just thought there was a great need for it, for that level of scrutiny, oversight at this level of government.
On your I'm just going to follow up that, like, say on your website, you tout yourself as a grassroots, nonpartisan organization. And for our listeners who do live in Mississauga, they no doubt know that you were a Conservative MP from Mississauga South back in the day. I wonder if you could just kind of give us listeners where did the nonpartisan bona fides come from? Like who's making up this organization? Kind of where your funding's coming from? Kind of give us kind of pull back the curtain a bit on how you guys work.
Yeah, lots of questions there. I'll say that, first of all, I certainly wouldn't want to hide my Conservative credentials, and I couldn't if I tried. So I've been in politics a long time, like 37, I think this is my 38th year of active politicking. And so I couldn't, so I can't deny that. But and so to say that that Municipal Watch is nonpartisan, I think can be squared with the fact that being conservative, I think in this case means that I'm looking out for taxpayers. I want transparency and mainly common sense. So sure, do my small c conservative spidey senses come into play all the time. But I think that doesn't mean that there aren't a lot of liberals supporting what we do, or New Democrats, or people who aren't identified affiliated with any party, just people who want kind of common sense government at the municipal level. In terms of supporters, I knew that it would actually not be all that difficult to find supporters. There are people out there who also agreed that there is a need for this, and they wanted, when I told them that I was thinking about doing this, they said, yeah, like, you know what, I'm individuals and businesses who said, yeah, I'll give you some money for that. Yeah, I don't mind pitching in. That seems like a good thing, and if we all benefit. So that group of people is growing, and I'm finding new people every day who are willing to make donations and to fund this effort. But it really is grassroots.
And what will you actually be doing? I mean, apart from, obviously, there's the media aspect, coming onto podcasts and whoever will help get your message out there. But Municipal Watch, I mean, what are you watching, and what will you be producing by way of actions, if you like?
Right. Yeah, show me the money. That's Roland's question. Also a good question. So I'd actually like to start, mainly the idea is to shine a light. And so to make folks aware, in Halifax, that something is happening in Vancouver, and that, if we don't stop what's going on there, it might happen in your city. So a lot, there's part of that where I thought that a coordinated effort was needed. And in terms of what we're going to do, I'm hoping to use many tools. As a former politician, elected official myself, I know what makes politicians sit up and take notice. And so sometimes it's sometimes it's a petition. Sometimes it's just a presentation to council. At other times, it might be a social media campaign, even an old-fashioned letter writing campaign. You never know really what each campaign, I think, will be individual and focused in a different way on achieving the outcome that we're looking for.
So, I mean, let's have some examples then. I mean, you've said you've used the phrase sort of municipal madness. Let's have some examples. Give us some cities that are doing mad things right now in terms of either spending or whatever it is they're up to.
Okay, well, there are so many, but I certainly, and they just really run the gamut. But just to give you an example, in Mississauga, where I used to serve, they spent, I think it was $130,000 to look into the renaming of Dundas Street. And so they found that the cost would be approximately $1.8 million. That's a lot of money. Apparently 10 people from the city inquired about, sent an emails or phoned in to their councillor and asked, hey, what's going to be done about this renaming of Dundas? Let's rename Dundas, or maybe even, will you rename Dundas? I'm not sure what the 10 inquiries actually, the content of them was. But for those 10 inquiries, potentially $1.8 million will be spent. And that does not include the homes and businesses that will be affected. And so even if the city spends $1.8 million, like where does it end? Are you asking those businesses to make those changes to their business, to their way of doing business? I mean, some people might say, oh, it's no big deal to change business cards and invoices and websites and whatever else needs to be changed. But, these are small things that can really, that are, I would say, misguided at best. And they don't really, I don't think it's worth it. I don't think it's worth the money.
Okay. But I'm familiar somewhat with the example that you just gave. The reason why the Mississauga was talking about changing Dundas was because there's historical connotations with the person that's named after. So, while I can understand the fiscal costs of changing it is something that has to be taken into consideration, there's more to it than just pure dollars and cents. There are people who would argue that the street shouldn't have been named Dundas in the first place because of the individual that it was named after. And I think that's why the city of Mississauga was investigating it. Now, my question comes to this, it's in politics. Politics isn't just a strict numbers and cents thing. This is, there were people in the community who said, we don't like this. We haven't liked this name ever. We don't like it now. We won't like it in the future. Change it. So how do you equate the needs of those people, and some businesses say, well, it's going to be an inconvenience for me to change my name or my address on my letterhead, etc.
It was 7,500 inconvenienced homes, people, and businesses. So first of all, not to go down that whole rabbit hole, but apparently Toronto's even backing down a bit on the Dundas Street renaming, because as it turns out, the history isn't quite as black and white as we were originally led to believe. Having said that, I would say that a number of cities in Europe have adopted the, I think they call it retain and explain model, which saves a lot of money, and it involves giving the history of the naming of the street and saying, this is what the situation was then. It's not that now, but here's the history, and we won't do it again, type of thing. But it's a lot cheaper, and frankly, just a lot better.
But they're a couple of years ahead of us, aren't they? I bet that the study that came up with the retain and whatever, the historic. Right. Let's find a way to balance everybody's the different needs of the people who find a name objectionable, and the need to. I hate to call road names.
Do what's right. Yeah, do it. Yeah, you want to do what's right.
Find the balance. I bet that cost more than $130,000. That would have gone through councils, and it will have been discussed over years. And it just so happens that they're a few further years down the road than we are.
Yeah.
And you know that in politics, there's not much you can do more than getting out of bed in the morning that doesn't cost about 130,000, because everything the government does gets billed at the highest dollar by whoever it is you're hiring to do the work.
Yeah. No, listen, the problem is more that these expenditures never end. There's never an end point. And there's always some new department that started, and new employees added to the payroll for basically.
A city like Burlington is constantly struggling, and actually Hamilton's struggling the same thing at the moment. They're struggling to get staff because they don't have enough money to pay what people want to be paid. They're not able to compete on the job market. So you're saying, and I know, say the planning department actually every municipality in Ontario, the planning department is understaffed. They cannot afford to pay the staff that they need to get through the workload that they have. Is that waste? And that's probably the most important thing that every city does is handle planning and zoning and dealing with all that stuff.
That has not been my experience. I don't think that's the case in Mississauga. In fact, I'm doing a little side research on this. In fact, and I'm hoping to release it soon. So I'll come back to you and I'll send it to you when I do. I'll certainly post my findings, and what I'm looking into is the past 5 years growth in full-time employment in however many cities I can. I have the time to look at. I've done about 20 or so far, and the growth in the last 5 years has, generally speaking, and I can say this without having fully analyzed the numbers just yet, but the growth is not commensurate with population growth. So I hadn't heard that that's happening in Burlington, and it, as I say, has not been my experience in Mississauga. They pay pretty well in Mississauga, and I think what happens when people take jobs with cities and towns, they're, other than maybe the top job or the top 2 or 3 jobs, they're in there for life and a pension.
I think there's definitely one thing we can agree on, and that there are all kinds of systemic problems in municipalities. You'll get an argument from us here. We've been, that's probably one of the 2 big topics that we've dealt with on here the last 2 years. I guess I would say, when you go immediately for the taxation angle, I came from a country where I paid far more in municipal taxes than I do here. 20 years ago, the increase is usually, in Halton it's been like 1.52%, 3%, depending how you define it as city or region, and the 2 get lumped together. Obviously, now we're dealing with a high inflation sort of world, and it is a world that the world is now facing, much higher inflation than we've dealt with for decades and decades. That's going to have an impact, and we're dealing with a province that has just taken away, through several acts, some key funding, some key sort of revenue generating avenues for the cities. So it's a bit rich now to, having seen all of that, to then say, oh my God, this is outrageous, they're increasing our taxes. And so what the hell else are they supposed to do? I mean, how do you answer that point?
Yeah. Well, I'd say the average person is tightening their belts, and that's what municipalities should be doing too. So when the city of Mississauga passes a budget with a 3% increase and pat themselves on the back for that, those of us who lived in Peel region know that that's just the city portion. And then we'll also be paying the 2.8% Peel portion as well. That's not 1 or 1.5%. That's 5.8. Compounded if they do it again next year and the year after and the year after. Listen, I don't want to be all about, this isn't all about taxes either, but Edmonton there was a city staff proposed a 7% increase. They got it down to 4, which is still ridiculous. The city of Mississauga, I think
Vaughan is talking about much higher numbers than that. I can't remember if it's Vaughan.
East Gwillimbury is talking 100.
Yeah, I mean, they're saying, we have cities saying we are we are in financial crisis now because our traditional revenue generating development fees are basically what we've been basing our books on. And by the way, they shouldn't have done that. That's something that you could highlight, that's a Ponzi scheme, how they've been building their finances on growth. But nevertheless, the province has taken that away, and they're like, oh my God. So again, not really their fault. They've had this thrown on them with no consultation, with absolutely zero kind of involvement from the province. And well, let's address that point, and then
sure. Agree completely. When the cities complain that they need those development fee, I agree. I think the developers are just going to pass it down to the consumer anyway. Do we really think that they're going to build these houses and actually deduct the cost of the development fee? And no, they're going to take it. They're going to say, "Oh, what a windfall we've just found." Totally get that. I agree with you there. I've never heard the words Ponzi scheme used in relation to, but could be fitting. It's
actually not mine. If you look at the Strong Towns website, they've been calling it a Ponzi scheme.
Same as the website, YouTube channel, not just bikes. The idea was basically that cities build a neighborhood. That it gets sold off, and then to pay for the infrastructure cost, the sewer, the hydro, all that stuff that they now have to pay to maintain, they need to go build a new subdivision to basically pay off the one that they just had built.
Right.
And that's essentially the story of sprawl in 905. That's how like Mississauga and Brampton, Vaughan, Richmond Hill, Markham, all of our cities in the 905 were built out, was this idea like, oh, we just built this great new subdivision. Yippee. Oh, we got to pay for all that sewer lines now. Build another subdivision. And now we're kind of at that point where we say this model doesn't, we've kind of hit the limit of what this model can deliver for taxpayers and ratepayers in these cities.
Always one behind.
Exactly. And I want to just maybe take a step back from the taxation angle, and I want to kind of focus back on your organization, because I'm wondering, like, do you think you might have bitten off too much to chew on this project? Most because the municipal structures vary drastically across this country. Just in the 905 alone, Mississauga and Hamilton are not Milton, and they're not like Halton Hills, and they're not Lincoln Township. None of them would be compared to a city, say, like Toronto. And so I'm wondering, how do you balance that? How do you balance like the needs of a small town trying to pay for road paving compared to a city, say Mississauga or Hamilton, that might be looking and saying, we want to see about financing a major stadium project or a major infrastructure project to more parklands or a mall development or whatever have you. I'm just spitballing here. How are you going to balance that?
There is no question that the problems are the challenges, the issues are all over the map. And they run the gamut from corruption to policies and programs. And so I actually did think about this before I started. Should I limit it? I knew that if I did limit the scope of Municipal Watch, that I would always want to be pushing the boundaries, and that someone in Saskatchewan would hear about something happening in Markham and say, hey, that's happening, or some version of that is happening here. So I didn't want to limit myself. You're absolutely right. It's a lot to bite off. And I'm noticing that even right now, because as I struggle to keep up with the phone calls and the emails and all the stories I'm hearing. But I think I'd rather have that problem than the problem of artificially limiting myself and the organization. So I know that at some point I'll be, at certain times I will be behind the eight ball and maybe not doing as well as I should, shining a light on this or that. But I'd like to be able to pick out the issues and the happenings, the examples of municipal madness, without having to limit myself. And so And as I said earlier, there are situations, there are things happening in certain municipalities that if Municipal Watch is successful at shining that light and bringing that transparency, then I hope that other municipalities will say, oh, wait a minute, maybe it's not such a good idea if we do that. And so that was also part of my argument for keeping it as big as possible, because so I'll just give you another drill down again on another example, and that's I talk about the fire trucks in Vancouver that pump 40% less water. The electric fire trucks that were purchased in Vancouver that are 40% less effective in fighting fires. And so, if it might be too late to stop that, stop them from buying those, but other municipalities across the country might look at that and say, I don't want my residents complaining to me that if their house is on fire, they'll be 40% less effective at putting out the fire, because that speaks to a lot of things, but not just public safety, but the importance of service delivery and sticking to your sandbox at the municipal level. And I have talked to councillors, actually, current and former, and one of them in particular said, he's actually from the 905, said to me that not a week goes by when that some other level of government doesn't encourage them to put out some kind of proclamation stating that they are for this or against that. And he said most of the time it has nothing to do with garbage pickup, emergent, EMS, water, roads, transit, libraries, all of the things that they really should be focused on. And there isn't enough time in the day for the average councillor to do all those things. These are important things that affect people's lives every day. And so why are they spending their own time at council debating? Why are they spending staff time to research all of this when it's not something they should be doing? Anyway, I found that interesting to hear from an actual councillor who said,
I tell you what, you're not going to find it hard to find councillors who'll tell you the stuff that happens at council is crazy. Sure. Most of them will agree with you on that. As I say, we would totally agree with you that.
Yeah.
The only problem is defining your personal crazy. And it's like, you use that phrase right back at the start, common sense. And I always have a kind of problem with when we talk about, common sense, ordinary people say, it's like, well, my common sense and my ordinary people, who I think are pretty ordinary, think this. And there's a whole bunch of other people who are just as ordinary as I am. I don't think I'm anything special, who think something fundamentally different. We both think, well, obviously this is the case. And then when you do a little bit of digging, you find that it's not quite as simple and obvious as you thought along. And the real problem with our politics these days is that everything is always simplified down to a soundbite and oh my God, it's mad, they're spending gazillions on something. And then you do a little bit of digging. It's like, no, that's not true. That's not accurate. They've got those facts wrong. These stories happen all the time, and that they make great headlines, and they'll make great podcasts for people who probably have more popular podcasts than we do, because we don't do that stuff. But it's like we have a duty as people who are either reporting on it, or people who are involved in politics, or people who are saying that we need better oversight of these institutions, to not sensationalize, but to do that extra bit of digging. I mean, let's go back to the Dundas thing. And I have no opinion about it. I can see all kinds of things, and it's just one of those stories that I just wish didn't exist. Anyway, the Dundas story. There are undoubtedly thousands upon thousands of people who think just even talking about it is a waste of time, spending any money of it is a waste of money. There are also a large number of people who think it's really important that we don't honor former slavers or whatever. And Dundas wasn't a slaver, and I know. And there's people who think, well, regardless of what the population thinks, we need to show a little bit more respect to the First Nations. Wouldn't it be nice not to have someone who they associate with something. So it's never that simple, is it? I mean, you can say, well, obviously this is crazy. And then you do that tiny little extra step of research. And it's like, well, actually, no, I see their point of view. And isn't that what we need more than anything in politics right now? The ability to see someone else's point of view and go, oh, well, yeah, okay, I wouldn't have thought it was an important thing for me, but I see why it's important for someone else.
Right.
I mean, that's a very long question. Where do you go with that?
I completely, I get what you're asking. And I know that when I was an elected official, these were considerations that I had to balance every day. And talking about sensationalizing, I think maybe it's a spectrum, sensationalizing, shining a light. It's all part of the same thing. And if sometimes you do need to make a little bit of noise to get people to realize that this is happening in their own city and town or in the neighboring municipality. But I guess the way I look at it is that a lot of these roads that are paved with good intentions are sometimes they look good on the surface. And when you scratch the surface, you realize that they're really they are accomplishing something, but it's not usually benefiting the person who doesn't have a voice. And people who, I try to always think of the people who don't have voices, the ones who are not elected, the ones who don't understand the system, the ones who never appear on podcasts or whatever, and who are just trying to earn a living, put food on the table, pay the rent or the mortgage. And, will that person who is really, who feels powerless, who is for all intents and purposes powerless, am I speaking for that person? Because I really think that sometimes municipal councillors might lose sight of that. And frankly, if you didn't get into municipal politics to talk about potholes, stop signs, libraries, and police funding or whatever, that's actually a bigger deal. But but those are all really important things. And if you neglect those duties to talk about things that are the purview of other levels of government or that really don't benefit that person who doesn't have a voice, that's really what I'm hoping to call out.
I see. I understand the point there, but I guess our thoughts are. I mean, these things are always so complicated. Like we're talking cities with 500, 700, 800, a million people all living there, and not all of them are all unanimously agreeing. From what we've read about from your website and what you've published so far and kind of our conversation so far, I think your focus is indeed small c conservative in terms of tax dollars and how it's being spent, and that's being spent wisely and responsibly, which I think everyone listening can agree. Like that's important. I think the first role of government is to make sure that money is being spent properly and responsibly. The question, though, and I think this is where it comes into. This is this is where the drama happens. Is where's that responsibility? What's that look like? And we were talking about the Dundas example. I'm not going to talk about that, but I was thinking a perfect example in Hamilton was there's a Johnny McDonald statue in Gore Park that it was entirely a municipal responsibility. It's not provincial or federal or anything else. And there was a big debate on whether or not to keep it up or tear it down. Like that, those are the things that municipal councils have to step in and say at one point, keep it up, leave it up, take it down, throw a tarp over it, whatever the case may be. So I guess my question is like, where would you, how would your organization wade into this debate? Because I can understand people saying, well, I don't want to spend money to take it down. I'm also understanding a lot of people are saying they find the statute offensive, and we can't negate those opinions. We may not agree with it, but we can't ignore it. And I'm wondering, like, how does your organization walk that fine line to say to measure the municipal government's response to that?
Yeah, and you're right. There aren't many issues today that are uncomplicated. If life were straightforward, it would be easy to be an elected official. And I really do have the utmost respect for anyone who puts their name on a ballot. I mean, I've enormous respect. I've done it myself. I know that everyone goes into it wanting to be an agent of positive change. They want to do, they go into it for good reasons. But so yes, sometimes they have to make tough decisions, and rarely are 100% of the residents on one side or the other. So I guess my criteria would always be: are they putting people first? Is this going to improve the quality of life of the people they represent? So, I mean, I wish we hadn't gone down the rabbit hole of the political correctness stuff and the statues and the street names. Although I brought it up, I recognize that. My fault. But I will say, there are issues that, again, are also within the purview of municipal governments where, they've just been total catastrophes. And now I'm thinking about the Ottawa LRT as an example.
Okay.
So probably a better example of just complete mismanagement eventually ended up in a public inquiry. Even earlier this year, shut down because of freezing rain on the lines. Can you imagine a transit system in Canada that's shut down because it's cold?
Well, on that note, I mean, here in the 905, Hamilton is talking. They're going to be breaking ground on an LRT. So, how would your? I mean, the agreement has been made. The funding has been signed over from the federal government. The province is on board to fund it. I believe the municipality is sorted out. How would your organization approach that project going forward? I mean, it looks like it will be built. So
yeah. Well, I first of all, I would say to those councillors in Hamilton, please read the report that I read about what happened in Ottawa, where there were so many issues. It reads like, I mean, honestly, it's hard to imagine that so much went wrong. Mm-hmm. Everything from computer glitches to door faults to in the construction phase, there were derailments, that was, I guess, right after, maybe that was in the testing phase, or I think even when it first opened, it was down. There were lawsuits. Oh, sinkholes. There was a section on sinkholes. I guess I would say, look, let's be cautious. Let's please, Hamilton, look at what happened in Ottawa, learn lessons from that. Speak to the people in Ottawa, read the entire account of the public inquiry and take those recommendations seriously. If there were any, I actually don't know if there were any.
Have you looked at KW's LRT project?
I have not. Tell me about it.
Well, I mean, it was the same issue. People were against it. People were angry that money was being spent on it. It was a horrible, horrible decision, a waste of tax dollars. How dare they? They're going to inconvenience all of us. This is the stupidest idea ever. Region went ahead and built it, and it is a roaring success. It is well used. They've expanded it. I have seen it myself. I've not yet ridden it, but I've seen it. I have friends and family still in KW who say, yeah, it was a fight. It was a slog. It was every grassroots organization came out against it. But in the end, the region went ahead and pushed forward to get it built. And now that it's up and running, it is a success. It is a fundamental part of that region's transit system. My understanding is that it is funded. It operates well. It's well used, and it has. It's a. I mean, it's not without. It's not. I'm going to say it's run perfectly, but I mean, a lot of people are turning to that as a success story in terms of LRT development that we should be exporting to other municipalities across the country.
Good. Well, I hope that both Mississauga and Hamilton will take a page from Kitchener's book. Then
we've been saying that for years.
Yeah, there you go.
We've just got a few minutes left. There's two things I think we have to address before we die. And the first one is the province. I mean, as I say, we would agree on a huge number of things, and the key one being that there are massive systemic problems with how municipalities work. I guess my difference of opinion would be that I see them as systemic with the design of the system, that the design creates bad results. It creates the wrong kind of people being elected. It creates those people staying in office for decades and decades with very little oversight and being re-elected with massive majorities. Pick examples from recent history in Hamilton if you want to do, evidence of that. But all those things are actually not in the municipality's power to fix. They're actually the province's responsibility, and it's all in the Municipal Act. And yet, fair's fair. This is a very non-partisan statement because the Liberals were in office for however long and did nothing about it. And now we've had 5 years of a PC government doing absolutely nothing about it. And if anything, I would say making the situation a whole lot worse. Particularly with the strong mayor suggestion, so-called strong mayor, which are not strong mayor suggestions, but anyway.
Strong mayor, not good for democracy, though, is it?
Well, not when you have minority vote winning a vote. I mean, that seems kind of broken, So, stick clear of the partisan stuff, but isn't the real problem with municipalities and the thing that needs to be watched and fixed and needs to have its be kind of raised and made a major issue is the need for fundamental reform at the provincial level of the Municipal Act?
That's an excellent question. So I try. They are creatures of the province, municipalities, and I hate to say that. It sounds like I'm talking about vermin or something, but
it's in the Constitution, so it's just the way it is.
Right. This is how it works. So all I will say to that is that the Ontario government should not be an impediment to the municipalities doing their job, and I can point to a number of recent examples where that's exactly what they're doing, and they're not making it easy for municipalities.
So give us those examples.
That the development fees, I think, is a big, that and the strong mayors are the two biggest examples. The whole Bill 23, like this is, I do feel for municipalities when they're getting the rug pulled out from under them on that. And there are other ways that we could address affordable housing shortage rather than taking away the development fees. And so that's a big one. That's obviously a big one. And the strong mayor, I can't see how making a municipality less democratic helps the average citizen. If a mayor, yes, it's true. A mayor is one vote. A mayor, just like the premier and the prime minister are one vote in the House of Commons. That doesn't mean they don't have levers and other ways to exert influence. And if a mayor, if there's a motion before council that a mayor wants passed and he or she is unable to convince more than half the councillors elected that it's a good idea, well, maybe it shouldn't pass.
There's one final thing I think we have to address. You're on the True North podcast, and the problem with that. But the subject of the 15-minute city came up, and we kind of chuckled about this because it's something we did an episode on recently. Give us your thoughts on the 15-minute city. You seem to suggest on the True North podcast that you accepted the kind of view of this that's been going around since kind of Christmas time, that this is an attempt to kind of lock people into their neighborhoods. Is that what you think?
So I understand that the goal is sensible densification, and that there are many positive reasons to have conveniences close by. Having said that, if traffic filters turns into some kind of traffic barriers, then I think they'll have gone too far.
But the suggestion in Oxford wasn't to lock people into their neighborhoods, right? You understand that point.
So I know that, I not to lock people in their neighborhoods, but to limit the number of the times that they could travel far and whatever.
So
or
I used to live in Cambridge, a different city, but similar in a lot of ways in terms of Oxford and Cambridge and all that stuff. And back in the 90s, and back then I couldn't drive into the center of town because it's a pedestrianized area, and most times of the week I wasn't allowed to drive in there because what would be crazy. It would completely, the town was designed for horses and carts and basically pedestrians. Cars didn't work, but obviously you also needed times when traffic could get in so they could deliver goods, and so people would fill up their market stalls. And that's exactly what's being suggested in Oxford, is that a city that has massive transportation problems in terms of traffic is saying, well, you can use this road any time of day you want, but if you want to use this particular bridge at this time of day, you have to pay for it. It's just congestion charging, which is used in cities all over the world, is not particularly controversial. You can still go wherever you want, just don't use that road because that road's really busy, and we'd prefer it if you didn't. And by the way, that has nothing to do with the 50-minute city concept. That's just traffic management.
Right.
50-minute city concept is simply the idea that it would be really nice if you live in a city if you could walk to the most important things that you use day after day, like the corner shop or a swimming pool or the bank or whatever, within 15 minutes without having to get in your car, unless you really want to. And if you want to, get in your car.
Sure.
So
it is two things, and one is that removing zoning district. If the goal is to have more convenience, more mixed use zoning, more mid and high rise buildings, that sort of thing. Better zoning is to minimize congestion, to increase densification sensibly. That's a good idea. Natural densification on that score and multi-use is all good. That's all good. But when we start talking about limiting where people want to live because they don't mind driving a half an hour to get groceries or whatever, I really don't think that should happen.
That's not what the 15-minute city philosophy is about. We didn't.
But I do know that there's a lot of judgment out there for people who live in, 98% of Canada is rural, and only 20% of the population lives in those rural municipalities. And these are folks who've chosen to mostly use their car to get places. And I
hear you. Like my in-laws are all like, they literally live in the middle of nowhere. Like their house is in the middle of a field.
Yeah.
And nothing's around them for like half an hour. I understand that. No, we're
and it's a choice. So I just wouldn't, actually the funniest thing I read about this was just an off the cuff comment by I think it was in the National Post, a journalist who said, well, they're trying to turn Edmonton into Manhattan, which I thought was kind of funny. Anyway, so I think we need to be realistic, and we remember what the goals are, which are affordable housing, traffic calming, All of these things are fine. But when it crosses the line into, I don't know, it has the potential to cross over the line. And I don't see that happening so far, but I wouldn't want that to happen. And I don't think people are silly who are worried about it.
I'm going to say something, Stella. From what you just described, you sound like you're in favor of the 15-minute city, because that's what we're promoting. That's what it's promoting, is like intensification, densification, walkability, and the choice of being able to walk to the corner store to pick up your milk and bread, or if you want to go across town to get the really good stuff, the really good bakery that we all know every city has, you can do that as well. And
or the choice to live nowhere near a 15-minute city,
and
to drive a half an hour to get a good cup of coffee or
nobody's saying if you want to live as my in-laws do in the middle of nowhere, you're entitled to do that. This is Canada. Nobody can stop you from living wherever you want. We're just saying, like, the idea of the 15 minutes, it was just a goal. Like, I don't even know if it's actually possible given the way that we've built our cities over the last 50 years. This is a pipe dream for a lot of us. I'm not entirely certain it's possible, but it's a nice goal to have. But I am seeing that we're coming up on our time, so I'm going to pull a plug in on this one. But thank you very much for coming on. I'm looking forward to seeing what you do and to see what you come up with over the next little bit. So thank you very much for coming on and sharing what Municipal Watch does with us and our listeners.
Thank you, Joel and Roland. And I hope to be back. I hope that I do something interesting enough in the next little while that you say, oh, let's have her back to talk about that. If you do, let us know, and we will see if we can find a half an hour to chat. Thank you. I appreciate it. I'll keep listening to your podcast. I love it.
Thank you so much.
That's it for this episode of the 905er. Thank you for listening. As always, you can send us your feedback, thoughts, and concerns, or ideas for future episodes to our email, info@905er.ca. We'd love to hear from you. You can help us keep the 905er going by financially supporting us through Patreon as well as PayPal. Visit us at 905er.ca and click on the support tab. As well, links are in the show notes for your convenience. Lastly, you can find us on social media. Search for _905er on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. So long for now. See you next time.